Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Well, now the time is almost 6.5 past 12, and BBC One is closing down. But don't forget, of course, that Radio 2 will be staying on the air until 2 o'clock this morning with Brian Matthews' show Round Midnight. That's on Radio 2. But now, from all of us here, this is Peter Brook wishing you a very good night.
One of the most consistent and memorable parts of television during the 20th century was when broadcasters actually closed down each day and bid you good night. The Closedown was almost ritualistic in its approach and formed the bookend to a day's daily broadcasting for decades. All the broadcasters did it. The BBC...
Good night. And, oh, by the way, just let me remind people in the northwest of England who may perhaps have been having rather poor quality from their pictures during this evening on BBC Two due to some interference. We would like to apologise to you especially for that interference and hope that tomorrow everything will be okay. So, from BBC Two, good night.
Channel 4...
Well, with the time at just after 8 minutes past 2, that's all for this evening on Channel 4. You've got just under 22 hours to think up some resolutions to take you into the new decade. Julian Cleary will be here to give you a sticky new year. In the meantime, this is Hayden Wood, my colleagues, wishing you a very good night on behalf of Channel 4. Thank you for being with us, and good night.
All of the various ITV regions...
And back on Yorkshire Television, it's 12:37, and we're now closing down. So on behalf of all of us here, this is Redvers Kyle saying, look after yourself, sleep well, and a very warm good night, especially to you.
All of them handled the close down differently, but each of them became a recognisable and memorable part of that broadcaster's history. The standard would generally be a look ahead to the following day's programmes.
Programmes tomorrow evening on BBC One.
A weather forecast giving audiences a clue as to what it would be like when they set a foot outside the next morning.
And it will feel cold in the strong and blustery northwest wind. And that's the forecast.
Followed by a look at the channel's clock, before bidding viewers goodnight, often with a blaring rendition of the national anthem, God Save the Queen. There were, of course, several variations over the years.
And that final reminder, please don't forget to switch off your TV set. Good night again.
For example, on occasion, between the weather forecast and the final continuity announcement, a public information film would play. They were often the less horrific variety, less showcasing a bloody outcome, and more giving viewers tips, advice, or stark warnings regarding various topics. Here's some examples of the kind of piffs you may have seen in the wee small hours before the close down.
Overfill a fat pan. And this could be the result. Make sure your fat pan is never more than half full.
Put it this way, if you're a smoker, next time you finish a fag, think of all the places in your factory that could catch fire from a burning cigarette end. Put it another way, if your factory went up in smoke, where would you and your mates go? Put it whichever way you like, but when you've finished, put it out. Properly.
That was a public information film.
Most close downs, when it came to continuity announcements, were largely uneventful. Mere formalities before the anthem, tone or test card, and then a fade to black as transmitters were shut down. However, there were some exceptions, particularly in the BBC's case, as they rebranded their channels. Often in these moments, the continuity announcers would mark the occasion, commenting on the final appearance of whatever ident was spinning on screen.
Tomorrow morning we'll be back bright and early with a brand new look to BBC One and also BBC Two, as our new channel symbols get their very first airing. And so as we say goodnight for this evening, we'll leave you with our very last look at the BBC One globe. Good night.
And as we close for the night on BBC Two, we also bid farewell to this particular channel identity. And away it goes forever.
The biggest threat to the close down always remained the prospect of an ever-expanding programme schedule, and eventually the idea of 24-hour broadcasting. Never-ending television. What a concept.
Well, it's
just 7 minutes to midday. And until the first of those programmes at 2:15, BBC Two is closing down. Good morning.
For many years, afternoon closedowns were a thing, where shortly before or after lunchtime, a channel would close down for a few hours and start back up during the early evening. Initially, this was due to government-imposed restrictions on the amount of hours broadcasters could transmit each day, but when these restrictions were eventually lifted, budgetary issues would prevent some broadcasters from making the jump to fill the previous hours of downtime.
Until then, the test card and tone.
ITV would gradually be able to abandon afternoon closedowns throughout the 1970s, whereas the BBC couldn't offer a full daytime service across both of its channels until 1986. However, the nighttime closedown would remain. When Channel 4 debuted on the scene in 1982, they too would close down in the early hours of the morning, without the national anthem, but with a blast of the iconic four-score tune and the equally iconic Four Ident. With 4 terrestrial channels in operation, television continued to change rapidly as the 1980s progressed. It wouldn't just be the greater implementation of shiny new computer graphics, but broadcast hours continued to expand. The ITV network, under orders from the IBA, began to introduce 24-hour programming across the different regions in the last few years of the 80s. Each region marked this change in their own way. For example, here's a clip from Tyne Tees, where a rather low-key announcement is made regarding the switch to round-the-clock broadcasting.
Tomorrow night, and that will take us into the early hours, because starting tomorrow night, of course, we go round-the-clock 24-hour television here at Tyne Tees. Here's a look at the weather forecast.
Well, as I said, Night Network starts next weekend, so it falls to me to utter those immortal words for the very last time on LWT. Don't forget to switch off your set. Good night.
By the dawn of the 90s, the entire network was offering 24-hour broadcasting for their respective viewers. This left the BBC playing catch-up. Without the commercial coffers that ITV enjoyed, budgetary restrictions and limitations continued to defer the introduction of a 24-hour service for either of the BBC's channels. A new challenger threatened the elder statesman and its competitors this decade as well, that being the rapid expansion of satellite television, offering hundreds of channels for audiences, many of them broadcasting 24 hours a day. As the 90s trundled on, the BBC continued to make changes in as many departments as it could, and yet the humble closedown sequence remained. It would come about later and later into the night as they inched closer to longer broadcasting hours, but viewers who stayed up late enough or had simply left the telly on could still hear the national anthem every single night. Eventually though, this had to change.
Classic costume drama for New Year's Day, now on BBC One. A passionate love story set against a background of family prejudice and rivalry. George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss.
1997 was a monumental year for the BBC. After decades of using the slanted 3 blocks, a major corporate rebrand was coming, one that would define their year. That was, until right before it, this happened.
This is BBC One. We've interrupted our programmes for a news report. We now go over to Martyn Lewis in the news studio.
We interrupt this film to tell you we are getting reports that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been badly injured in a car crash in France.
Normal programming has been suspended. And we now join Martyn Lewis in the news studio.
This is BBC Television from London. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris. The French government announced her death just before 5 o'clock this morning. Buckingham Palace confirmed the news shortly afterwards. Normal programmes have been suspended while we bring you the latest developments throughout the morning.
Diana's death shook the world, and for the broadcasters, this was the moment they had to snap into action and deliver the sombre news in the most comprehensive and best way they could. The BBC were one of the first to report and confirm the news, and the coverage has gone on to be some of the most well-documented in their history of news programming. Just over a month after the princess's death, the BBC's corporate rebrand finally came into effect, in the early hours of the 4th of October, 1997.
Hello, very good morning and welcome to BBC One on Saturday the 4th of October with a brand new look.
As the BBC One balloons soared across the skies, viewers were made very aware from the get-go that this was a channel fresh and ready for the impending millennium. But one fact still remained. BBC One, the UK's oldest and most well-known channel, was still not broadcasting 24 hours a day. Programming had been extended well into the early hours for sure, but when looking at their biggest rivals over at ITV, most of its regional operations went to 24-hour broadcasting nearly a decade earlier, and with the youngest terrestrial player, Channel 4, having finally moved to round-the-clock broadcasting in the January of 1997, it really felt like the Beeb were far behind the times. But shortly into the rebrand, that fact too was about to change. Saturday the 8th of November, 1997, just after 3 AM, BBC One closed down for what would be, unbeknownst to many, the final time.
And that's it from BBC One for Saturday night. Hope you enjoyed the show, and just to let you know that as from midnight Sunday, instead of leaving you in the dark at Closedown, we'll be joining a brand new service, BBC News 24, for through-the-night coverage and reports from around the globe. In the meantime, we're heading for some shut-eye, but please join us again and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Good night.
Just as the continuity announcer proclaimed, the following day on Sunday the 9th of November, BBC News 24, the corporation's brand new rolling news service, would broadcast in what had been the downtime hours overnight, effectively offering viewers a look-see as to what this new service was all about. And whilst rolling news is easily accessible and a standard now, such was not the case for the BBC in 1997. It wouldn't be until the launch of digital television some years later that BBC News 24, eventually shortened to just BBC News, would really take off.
Now on BBC One, it's Through the Night with BBC News 24.
So, BBC One's final close down was rather unceremonious, wasn't it? No major tribute to the feature of television that stretched back all the way to its inception. In many respects, it sort of epitomises what the sequence was all about, really. It took place every night, but it never wanted to be too grand, despite the presence of the national anthem. It never strived to be anything more than what it was, a simple process of giving you a glimpse of the next day's programming, what the weather was going to be like, perhaps a public information film to teach you a damn good lesson, before wishing you a peaceful night's sleep, before blaring God Save the Queen down your eardrums. Television close-downs, in the sense many know them for, are no more. Of course, there are channels on the telly these days that don't broadcast 24 hours a day, with some shutting down, whereas others offer preview programmes, teleshopping, or a mix of the two. Really, in today's world, it doesn't matter whether TV broadcasts 24 hours a day or not, as with the amount of entertainment and information now available at our fingertips, we could easily find something else to do than watch television. But the classic close-downs are an oddity of the medium that has continued to fascinate, intrigue and entertain people long after they cease to be. So, as we bow out, have a look at your nearest TV screen. Imagine a clock ticking well into the early hours of the morning, and wishing you a very good night.
Good night.
Oh, and don't forget to switch off your television set. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dodd Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Liam Demain, AJ Mac 200017, Jen, Traffy, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Evan Hart 42 Radio, Tim Ripley, 40-something Manchild, Mr. J McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Shadowfiend 180X, Swan Ronson, Adam Gamer, Sir Fonzie Daz, Tegan, Matthew Elliff, Pigeon's House, Seraphic Euphoria, Dave Batten, Leonard Starbuck, Kevin Mallon, Liam Turner, and Jenny T, our AMTV staff members.